Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Got the 4 Points. My name's Rob, that is Pistol over there. It's another week in late March. Pracky matches are starting to get underway in local footy. We're excited to bring you lots of news and lots of info about local footy as we go on through the season. Hey, we're launching a new Spotify soon, so you'll be able to listen to these local footy updates on Spotify. That'll be at Got the 4 Points. And also, while I think of it, make sure you check out our Instagram. Also got the 4 points. That's the number four in there. And our email is gotthefourspoints@gmail.com. We would love to hear any stories you've got from your pre-season. If you've got funny stories, stuff that's happened, stuff you want us to know about. Maybe you've got some big recruits. Maybe you're just super excited about how your season's going to line up. We'd love to hear it all. We'd like to incorporate more from what you guys are thinking and what's happening around your clubs. We can't possibly cover every club just with the research that we do. So we'd love to hear directly from you guys what you're interested in, what you'd like to hear, and what's happening around your local footy. Pete, how you been?
I've been well, thanks, Rob. Just come off the Labor Day long weekend last weekend, which was good fun. But yeah, certainly. I mean, AFL underway. So at time of filming, we had the Carlton Richmond game last night, and I don't know whether many would have had Richmond tipped, but I also don't know too many outside of Carlton fans that are overly disappointed to see another Carlton capitulation. So what a way to let's bring back that as get rid of opening round or round zero. Let's bring back Carlton capitulating round one, first game of the year against Richmond. I will take that. Not I'm not a Richmond fan, but I will take that every day of the week. That was good fun. So again, I'm sure Carlton fans feel very differently about that, but I'm not one of them, so I don't care.
I was very surprised when I checked my phone this morning. I'm still over here in America, so didn't get to see the game live. Plus, I was out till ridiculous hours after the Nuggets game last night, so I was not watching any AFL. But yeah, I'm in the same boat. I wasn't too upset to see a Carlton capitulation, but I probably should keep my trap shut after the Collingwood performance in round zero. So hey Pete, I heard that there's a bit of a round zero going on in local footy too. There's a fixture that's been brought forward in the Eastern Footy League. I've actually forgotten the clubs now, which is terrible research of me, but they're having the first game of the Eastern Footy League a couple of weeks before the rest of the season. So maybe local footy is experimenting with round zero too. I think it's
Interesting.
some kind of clash of fixturing later in the winter. But
Right.
anyway, I can't say I'm a big fan of the round zero, but I'm glad that the AFL's back and yeah, wasn't too upset to see Carlton get done. There was a really, really awesome clip I saw from Corbin Middlemass, of an ABC, the end of the ABC call, and he was so excited about, this is what we love about footy when you get the underdog coming up, and so many players under 30 games or whatever it is for Richmond. So not that I'm a Richmond fan either, but also, yeah, happy to see that result. That was good fun.
It was,
Um,
but
yeah. Mate, we've both gone the same gear again. Last week we were in Black's gear. I promise we're not communicating on this. Completely random choice. Uh, yeah, pretty terrible performance last night from Denver after they had probably their best win of the year over Oklahoma. But we're not an NBA podcast, so
we're not.
we guess we should leave that alone. But it's just funny we ended up in the same gear. Um, what are we doing today, Pete? What's on the program?
So today we're going to be looking at the VAFA. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a season preview of Prem A, Prem B, Prem C, and also just take a little quick look at Division One and see who will be joining the ranks or who could be joining the ranks of the Premier divisions come 2026. So we're going to be looking at sort of all those permutations, who's come up, who's come down, how teams are shaping up, what recruits are looking like, and then make some wildish, outlandish predictions that could be spot on the money, or we could get halfway through the year and just go, well, we know absolutely nothing. So yeah, we'll be just having a little bit of a look at that. I think you're going to be looking after A and C, and I'm going to be looking after B and one. Um, but yeah, keen to sort of explore the VAFA and those sort of four grades, and as we've spoken about on previous episodes, the VAFA is near and dear to our hearts with our love of the Uni Blacks and our involvement there. But yeah, it's certainly also a competition I just really enjoy looking at. There's something about, and you and I have both mentioned we're from country footy. There's something about promotion relegation that just will make me check out Premier C, even though I have zero interest in any of the teams in Premier C. But I just like to see who's potentially going down, who's pushing their way forward. And there's certainly some stories that we'll get to across these four grades as we dig in. But that's what we've got on the agenda today.
Yep, absolutely. So we're going to kick it off with A grade, the top flight, Victorian Amateur Football Association, for those who don't know the VAFA, uh, Premier Amateur Footy Comp in Victoria, uh, and some might say in Australia, judging by previous results. Actually, I think the Western Australians might have beaten the Big V last year, so maybe not the Premier one, but a
No, I
very
feel like they did. They won last year over in WA. I feel like maybe the year before that we beat them over here. I reckon we played them a couple of years in a row, but I reckon when we
yeah,
beat them over here, I reckon that was extra time. I reckon they did
yeah,
a
that's
little.
true.
I reckon they did a little OT. But yeah, I think they might have handled the VAFA pretty easily last year. I heard a lot. It was about the football that they use over there. Absolute trash, little burly football that they use over in WA. Now I'm just taking. I was last week. I was just taking pot shots at Western Bulldogs players. Now I'm just taking pot shots at WA in general. But
England would never win the Ashes if we played with the Kookaburra ball everywhere.
that's
Uh,
a really good point.
but we're not a cricket podcast either. All right. So last year, Pete, let me run you through just very briefly what happened last year. So I'll give you the ladder from 2024, A grade. Old Brighton finished on top, pretty handily on top, with 16 wins. The next best and second place, St Kevin's, had 12 wins. So that's a
Mm,
very handy buffer at the top there for Old Brighton. Old Scotch finished third, and as we know, they ended up going on a really good run through the finals and won the premiership. First Old Scotch Premiership for many a year. Can't remember the exact number, but very ecstatic scenes there at the Camberwell Sports Ground. Collegians finished in fourth, rounding out the final four. Outside the four, we had Old Zavs, perennially there and thereabouts in A grade. The Uni Blues finished in sixth. Just behind them on a handful of percent were our favourites, the Uni Blacks. St Bernard's came in eighth, surviving relegation by 14%. So actually a pretty handy percentage buffer, but equal on wins with
mm,
Fitzroy, who just went down back to B grade, and Old Melburnians. It sort of seems like OMs were comfortably relegated to B grade, but that's not really true. It was extremely tight right until the end. And I know that you're going to be having a little look at Fitzroy and OMs when we get into B grade. But um, yeah, Old Brighton on paper in the home and away season, far and away the strongest side, and will probably in some ways consider that to be a lost opportunity, not having won the flag, um, winning 16 out of the 18 games, 144% on their score. So pretty impressive. Um, Now coming up to A grade in 2025, we have De La Salle, who haven't been in A grade since 2019, and Old Haileybury, who have only been in B grade for the last two seasons. So reasonably recent, I guess, returnees to A grade, clubs that are not unfamiliar with A grade, but you could say perhaps Old Haileybury a little more recently familiar. De La Salle have worked their way back slowly, but they've got there. And certainly the first few years that I joined the Blacks, um, I joined the Uni Blacks in 2013, and through that sort of mid to late 19s, 2010s period, D-La were a lock, really. They were a side that always were there and thereabouts.
Mhm.
And it was a bit of a surprise, to be honest, when they got relegated in 2018 or 2019, sorry. All right, so that leaves us with a lineup for A grade: Old Scotch, Old Brighton, St Kevin's, Old Xaverians, Collegians, Blues, Blacks, St Bernard's, Old Haileybury, and De La Salle. So we're going to wildly make some predictions here. Had a little look at some of the recruits, had a little look at some of what's being written around the place, some of the word on the grapevine. And one of the great things about this time of the year is the grapevine. It's really strong. It's a tough old nut, that grapevine. Got plenty of interesting stuff for us. I'm going to go out there straight away and make some predictions for finals. So I know, Pete, in our previous discussions that you were not completely sold on Old Brighton in 2024, despite that outstanding season on paper, at least until the finals. Um, but I'm gonna put my hat in the ring and I'm gonna tip Brighton to win the flag this year. I think I think that season is pretty hard to go past, and I think that it's a truism in footy that you're good for the run, and there's a lot of upside in a club that has gone that far. By all accounts, retained quite a lot, perhaps in comparison to some other A grade sides. So there's been a few that have headed off to AFL and VFL. I guess that happens. You're in the top flight of the Amos, and you end up with attracting the scrutiny of the AFL VFL recruiters. Um, I did note that Brighton have got Felix Flockhart, Darcy Gilbert, and Luca McNabb committed to their list for this year. They were three players that were on their list last year, but spent a good chunk of the year playing VFL. Those three have come back from the VFL and committed full time. So they don't have any big name recruits in terms of AFL talent, but they've got some VFL talent committing full time. I reckon they'll be pretty hungry. And I think they have a decent home ground advantage down there on the bay. They play that ground well. They're always really tough to beat there. I know the Blacks gave them a good run down there early on in the season, but I think they'll mount a really good campaign. They'll be pretty hungry. They've got a captain, Harry Hill, who missed out on playing in the grand final somewhat controversially through a suspension. No, it wasn't. Sorry, an injury.
Concussion.
Yeah, concussion. That's right, not a suspension. Um, so yeah, my pick for the flag is Old Brighton. Um, the rest of the final four, it's really hard. You could throw a blanket over the field because we know through the past decade that we've been involved, A grade amateur football is incredibly consistent, incredibly tight. I can't go past collegians. I think that they are just so consistent and so strong. I also think they play their home ground incredibly well. They don't often lose at home, and you've got to bank wins at home. Um, I have to say I don't know a lot about their ins and outs this season. I haven't been able to find a whole lot online. I get the sense that that's how they roll, somewhat quietly, calmly. Um, but just my gut feel, having watched them the last few years, even when they don't seem to have any massive names on their list, they just look good. So I'm not going to necessarily go on an order, but I'm going to say Collegians will make the finals. Um, I think Old Scotch will make the finals. I think it's pretty hard to go past their run of form at the end of last season. They have lost a couple, I think, to VFL, but managed to retain a fair bit of their squad. I think they'll be strong. And I've got to slot the Uni Blacks in there. I reckon the Blacks can sneak in. Geez, there were some good signs. Both of the last two seasons, the Blacks have come home with a wet sail. They can get some momentum early on this season. Nobody likes playing the Uni Blacks when they've got momentum. And I think that'll be really a chance for our boys to take a big step up this year. Finals has got to be on the wish list, I would think. Um, Look, I think, as I said, you could throw a blanket over it. Old Zavs, St. Kevin's, I wouldn't be surprised if one of those made finals. They're so consistent. Um, there's certainly good history there. I guess St. Kevin's have been up there for quite some time, and I wonder if maybe it's time for them to have a bit of a down period, but you never know.
Mm.
Um, and at the bottom end, tough. Hard to pick a relegated team. My sense is that St. Bernard's have been up and down quite a bit between A and B grade over the last 5 or 6 years. They haven't shown that much consistency year to year. They did hang on last season, but they hung on. It wasn't overly convincing to me. Uh, from what I can tell, they haven't recruited that strongly, but it's a little hard to know. The grapevine can also be somewhat obscure. Um, so not really sure, but if I had to pick two relegated teams, they would be St Bernard's, and I think probably De La Salle. Um, I had a look through my infamous spreadsheet, Pete, and I can tell you that in 5 of the last 6 seasons, excluding COVID, so 5 of the last 6 seasons where there was relegation and promotion, one B grade team has gone down. One B grade returning team to A grade has gone straight back.
Right back.
Um, and I think on the strength of form at the end of last season in B grade, Haileybury will be stronger than De La Salle this year in A grade, and also they have more recent A grade experience. So my pick is the Snow Dogs and De La Salle to go back down to B grade. What are your thoughts?
Comprehensive, Rob, very comprehensive. Interestingly enough, and this is just because I have done a bit of research at the back end of last season. That Collegians' home form was actually worse than their away form last season. Interestingly enough,
Okay.
but I do agree with you. Every time the Blacks have played Collegians at Collegians, they just seem to play that oval so well. Um, and interestingly enough, St. Kevin's home form was 8-1, so they only dropped the one game at home. St. Kevin's. I do wonder whether St. Kevin's they finished second, as you mentioned late last season. They of course had the injury to one of their players, the horrific injury that occurred, and I just wonder whether that, rightly so, just completely
Mm,
distracted them for that back end of that season, which you can understand it would have. You can understand how a group would have been really affected by what they saw that day, and including potentially the Blues as well, who
yeah.
were the opposing team that day. You can understand that the guys that were on the oval that game potentially came off just thinking, oh, sometimes
Mm,
football, we love football, but sometimes things can happen and injuries can be sustained that are certainly life threatening. So it's interesting to see that. I think it's also interesting to look at, Brighton and Scotch. Brighton were the best attacking team last year. Scotch were the second best. Scotch were the best defending team. Brighton were second best. So those two, from an attacking and defending perspective, were really up in that top two. Um, they often say defense wins championships in basketball. Well, it sort of was proven accurate in the grand final last year, where Scotch managed to get over the top. But having watched that final between Scotch and Brighton, it was Scotch's attack that just was so vicious. They were just marking everything. They were clunking it. They were then slotting the goal, and they just put some real scoreboard pressure on Brighton. Certainly agree. I think Aylbury for me is always one that they're just always a danger team.
mm,
Like they've always got this ability to make it physical, make it close, and really keep teams within striking distance.
mm.
So I think they'll find the transition back into A grade a little bit easier than De La Salle. I think De La Salle might potentially struggle a little bit this year. I certainly think they'll still be a dangerous team. But it has taken them a while to build back into A grade since going back down to B. Funnily enough, Bernards is that you talk about up and down. Like they were ranked fifth for attacking last year in the VAFA. They had the fifth highest scoring potential of anyone. They were bottom for defending.
Mm,
So they can score big. They can also get scored against big. So
yeah.
I think that's a little bit of that Jekyll and Hyde that you do see sometimes from Bernards. Um, I'm gonna not that it's my prediction because you were looking after A grade, so I hadn't made any predictions
You
for A
can
grade.
predict too.
But I'll make a few just because why not? I reckon Collegians will actually fall out of the four.
Okay.
I'm gonna say Collegians are gonna. I don't think Collegians will be bad by any stretch of the imagination this season, but I just think the likes of Brighton, Scotch, St. Kevin's, Blacks, Blues. I just think they'll actually just be a little bit too strong for Collegians, and I think Collegians might find them somewhere around that mid-table. I
Yeah.
certainly don't think they'll be under any threat of relegation, but I think we'll probably see them mid-table. Is my opinion.
Hmm.
I think that we'll probably see Brighton up there. I think we'll see Scotch in the finals. Um, I think we'll probably see. Um, I think we'll probably see old Zavs up in the finals. As much as I just spoke about St. Kevin's, I think they might just drop out. I think they've been up there for a long time, and then I'm going to back you in. I reckon the Blacks are due a big year. I think some of that back end form that we've shown. I think if we can pick up some early wins early in the season and have some early momentum, I think that we've shown the competition that we can somewhat outstay them and play better for longer in the back end of the year. And we've
Mm,
shown that now 2 years in a row, which I must admit is quite impressive for what has been in the last couple of years a really young Blacks team. Like it's a really young group. Oftentimes with young teams, you see they sort of lose legs towards the end of the season, not gain legs. So,
mm.
um, so certainly that's maybe some predictions that I'll make for A grade. But in terms of relegation for A grade, yeah, I think probably sitting similar to you. I think De La Salle and St. Bernard's for me are the two going down in my opinion.
I think there's pretty much always a surprise packet in A grade.
Yep.
I feel like Brighton were the surprise packet last year. It just with how well they did.
Mm.
And I'm not saying the Blacks are going to be able to score as heavily and potentially have as many wins as old Brighton did, given the young squad. But I'm hoping that the Blacks can be that surprise team, and find their way up towards the top end of the ladder. So, all right, that was A grade. Um, and we know that Fitzroy and OM's dropped out of A grade back to B. So, how do you think they're going to go?
Yeah, so looking at B grade, so we've got Fitzroy and OMs coming down from Premier A. Um, I'm pretty bullish about Fitzroy. Fitzroy been primarily in B since 2015. Um, they had one visit to C in 2018, and then were straight back up. Um, so they somewhat have been around that B level for a while. They know that B level really well, and I know when we played them in B, they were always that team that you just knew you were going to get a good game. Like you never, I never went into a Fitzroy game going, gee, we're absolutely gonna smoke them here. Always thought this is gonna be pretty tight, and it more often than not it was.
Same in A grade too.
Correct. It was the exact same in A grade, and similar OMs. OMs have been in A since 2015 when they were promoted from Prem B. So they've been in A for a long time now. OMs they've been a somewhat of a mainstay of that competition for almost the last 10 years. Um, they probably haven't had the last couple of years in A grade they would have liked. The year before in 2023 they were close. to relegation. I think they just survived by the skin of their teeth. And then they just couldn't do that again for a second year in a row. So um, certainly Fitzroy a little bit like the Blacks. The second half of the season, Fitzroy were really really strong contenders, and they picked up a lot of wins. They were bottom of the ladder, probably going to be relegated the easiest. Pick two or three wins up at the end of the year, and they went from where they're going to be relegated to nearly knocking St. Bernard's out. They ended up, as you mentioned, on the same amount of wins and just down on percentage. Um, so they really came with a wet sail as well, Fitzroy, and I certainly am quite bullish about them up from Premier C, an old foe that the Blacks are used to seeing, Old Carey, and then Hampton Rovers. So Carey have what I can only accurately describe as yo-yoed up and down VAFA for the last few years. So they were up in A for a period, then they went down to B, then they went back up to A, then they went down to B, down to C. Then at periods, it looked like in C they might be back down to Div 1. They sort of pulled themselves together and had a really, really good year last year in Prem C to get themselves back up to Prem B. 2016, since Hampton were last in B, they've been in C for an extended period. Hampton, they've sort of been in that C grade since then, and even before they got up to B grade in 2016, they were in C for a long time before that as well. So they're a really well-versed team from Prem C, again making that jump to Prem B to see if they can solidify themselves in there. They join the likes that have stayed in Prem B, Old Trinity, who we've seen in A grade previously in recent times, Old Geelong, Old Ivanhoe, and Old Camberwell. Now, Old Ivanhoe and Old Camberwell were the two teams in 23 that came up from Prem C. So both of those teams solidified themselves within Prem B, which is quite impressive. Williamstown, CYMS, and Caulfield to round out the full 10 in B grade. So B for me, Rob, it's a really interesting grade. Coming back down, I'm not quite as convinced on, say, an OMs to win their way straight back up. And I'm not convinced. I'm bullish about Fitzroy, but it's not like a lock for me that they go straight back up either. As we well know with the Blacks experience, B grade can be a bit of a lion's den. And you've often got 4 or 5 teams that are waiting to try and crack into that A grade. So it's often not as easy coming down to B grade and just shooting straight back up, because there are teams that are hungry to do the exact same thing. So I really feel like that's what we've got ahead of us this year in B grade. As you mentioned last week, there's a few big arrivals occurring in B grade. There's whispers that Tom Hawkins will play at least a game for OMs. Thomas Bugg, you mentioned last week, going to Caulfield. Jackson Nelson, the West Coast player, going to Old Geelong. And you've got Alex Murkov from Carlton at Old Ivanhoe. So in terms of predictions, Rob, I'm also really bullish about Old Ivanhoe. So I think they've recruited well. They've got Patrick Naish, who played at Richmond and West Coast. He spent last year at the Wangaratta Magpies. From all reports, Toby McLean, the ex-Western Bulldogs players who played for Old Ivanhoe in 24, from all reports, he's recommitted in 25. So I really feel like they've recruited well. Plus they've kept some of that establishment. They had maybe a mid-table year last year. They were certainly thereabouts for finals. I think they struggled in the last few weeks, and some others put themselves ahead. With Old Carey, of course, beating Hampton in the grand final. In C, in B, it was of course Old Hailbury defeating De La Salle, as we mentioned. with Old Trinity and Old Geelong rounding out the four in 2024. So, but Old Camberwell and Old Ivanhoe were right there knocking on the door for finals as
Mm.
well. I will just mention in terms of dead and buried. Williamstown CYMS last season in B grade were dead and buried. There were Prem C was on the cards. There was just nothing from looking at the results that gave you any indication that this club was going to be playing in Prem B in 2025. They went on a run in the last 4 or 5 weeks that just must have been incredible to be at the club. Because they went from we're no chance, we're relegated to shit, we found ourselves mid-table. Like, yeah, we're mid-table now, and we've just knocked off a couple of clubs that are vying for final spots or in the finals. It was an incredible run, so credit to them. Um, I'm a little bit worried about OMs, Rob.
Yep.
Um, we always see there's always a team across one of the grades in VAFA that are always in danger of that double drop. So you drop down one grade and then somewhat the bottom falls out, players leave. You're bringing in a new crop of younger players. Probably a new coach comes in, trying to align the game plan, and sometimes it can really be dangerous to do that second drop. So I feel they're at the risk. They're at the risk of the double drop for me. That's one of my predictions. Is keep an eye on OMs. I feel like they're a double drop potential. Um, there's a lot of talk from them having a much younger side this year. And with young sides comes development. And as we just spoke about before, when you're developing in B grade, they come for you. There's clubs there that want to be in Premier A. They come for you, and young sides can sometimes get found out. So that's one of my early predictions. My latter prediction, Rob, I'm doing the full 1 to 10.
I
I'm
think
going big. I've got Fitzroy finishing on top. I think they had a really good year last year in A grade. I don't think they disgraced themselves in A grade by any stretch of the imagination. Um, they look to have recruited well. They look to have held on to a lot of guys they had last year. So I think they're a real chance. I'm putting Old Ivanhoe second. I think they've recruited well. I think last year may have been keep us in B grade, solidify us. This year's the push. I reckon this year is the push to we want to be into A grade. I've got Old Geelong and Old Trinity rounding out the 3 and 4 spot. I think both of those sides are similar. They've been in B grade for a little while. I think they've got some momentum, and they both had really good campaigns last year. And I think could somewhat consider themselves unlucky not taking that spot off De La Salle. It was really, I think, Old Hailbury were always they're going to go up and be promoted. I think between Geelong, Trinity, and De La Salle, it was sort of throw a blanket over them, and De La Salle were the ones that got up. Old Camberwell in fifth. I've got Old Carey doing themselves some justice and finishing in sixth and keeping themselves in B grade. Caulfield 7. We haven't spoken a lot about Caulfield. They were in A grade until a few years back. They struggled a bit in A grade. They struggled a little bit last year in B grade. I've still got them not necessarily struggling, but I've still not got them quite challenging yet in that B grade division. In eighth, I've got OMs, so I'm just keeping them above the double drop. But I reckon it could be a nervy season for them. And as much as I spoke about the incredible run, I've got Williamstown being relegated in ninth. They've been around that relegation mark for a while in B. I think it's an absolute credit to the club that they keep fighting and they keep staying in B. But I think at some point the fight leaves and you're just not quite there. And I've got Hampton finishing in 10th. I think Hampton, for me, they look like they've been in C a lot. They look like that classic club that gets to B and then can't quite match it and come back down to C. But they could prove me wrong. And I've and then I just one more prediction. So I think Fitzroy will finish on top. I think Old Ivanhoe will win the premiership.
Oh,
So
okay.
I think Fitzroy will finish on top. I think Fitzroy will get promoted with Old Ivanhoe. I think it'll be a Fitzroy Old Ivanhoe final. But I reckon Old Ivanhoe will win the premiership. So that's my predictions for B grade. Rob, I know there's a few teams there that are familiar to you from our Blacks experience. What's your take on B grade?
Great summary. Very comprehensive. Um, I was just having a little look um, at the end there while you were talking about old Ivanhoe. Trivia time for you. Do you know the last time they were in A grade?
Old Ivanhoe.
Hmm.
I'm going to go. It's a trick question, and the answer's never.
No, no, it's not a trick question. Um,
We'll
it's
edit
one of
that
those.
out.
It's one of, one of those really annoying questions that I've asked where it's not like it's 70 years, and it's not like it's 5 years. It's 2009 they got relegated. So it's a while.
2009. Okay,
Yeah.
been a
So
while.
it's a decent period out of A grade. And
Yep.
the other thing I would say about old Ivanhoe, given that I've just had a little look around for some information, extremely impressive website. Well
Yeah.
done,
Right.
old Ivanhoe. Yeah. But on the other hand, their jumper's brown with a white V. So not so keen on that.
Get
It's
a little more creative there.
I guess it's unique. Um, it's not even the poo and wee, it's just the poo.
I did see a little TikTok of another footy podcast. I can't remember what it's called. That's really bad of me. It's the guy from is it Auntie Donna or whatever? I think it might be the Bowden. Anyway, I know he does a footy podcast. It is really good. And they were going. I saw a little TikTok snippet of them going through clash jumpers and rating what they thought of the clash jumpers. And they went through Hawthorn's clash jumper, and
Oh,
it's basically brown on brown. And the guy did comment instead of the poos and wees, it's the poos and poos. So that just reminded me of that. But yeah.
yeah. Well, the old Ivanhoe jumper is like it's like the current Hawthorn Clash jumper before Hawthorn put it in the wash, and it kind of faded the white V to the light brown. That is all. That
Oh,
is awful. That Hawthorn jumper.
it
Anyway,
is.
um, so no, great summary, Pete. Yeah, I think it's a fair shout that Ivanhoe are a good chance. I picked Fitzroy to be my one of my paddock premiership favourites for the year, so I'm very much on board. I think they'll win the premiership. I don't think old Ivanhoe will win the premiership. I think the way that Fitzroy finished off that season, they look pretty strong. And physically strong. I think they might be a little bit too much for a fair bit of that competition. Um, yeah, interesting summary on some of the rest. I'm probably a little more bullish on Hampton, who have impressed me in some of the results last year, so I'm not so sure. Um, yeah, Old Trinity, I think, will be there and thereabouts. They've been pretty strong for a while. I think they will be pretty desperate to get back to A grade. They certainly pit themselves as an A grade club, and I think they probably will have felt like their window has been around for a
Mm.
few years, um, and they perhaps have been pipped by a few other teams who have stolen their thunder. I I would be not at all surprised if it's Fitzroy and Trinity returning to A grade. Um, I agree that Ivanhoe are probably the other smoky to get up there. Um, Old Geelong have been up and down a little bit. They were the surprise for me in the finals. I
Yep.
think some way through the season I was pretty confident that Old Ivanhoe would make the finals, and Old Geelong came with a good run at the end. So
Mm.
um, the rest of them I don't have too much really. Um, It's a really interesting grade, as you said. It kind of between those pushing for A grade. And some clubs that have come up from C grade, who maybe have been around the Div 1C region for a while, and they've got nothing to lose. There are some clubs in there, like Hampton and perhaps
Mm,
Williamstown, who are more familiar with D1 and C than B grade. Although, as you said, Hampton have been in B grade and Williamstown for a little while, but they got nothing to lose. If
mm.
they go back down to D1 or C, then it might be sort of their more natural spot. So, like Williamstown did at the end of last year, they can come with a bit of a wet sail and maybe surprise a few. Really interesting grade, as you said. I noted that the VAFA podcast did talk about that as, it's probably the hottest grade in the VAFA. Um,
Yep, I'd agree.
and geez, we love the end of year in B grade, that real push in finals
Great.
towards who's going to make it up to A grade. Um, would be really interesting for me if Fitzroy do end up winning the flag because look, it's an interesting argument. I always think in competitions where you've got relegation and promotion, if you're a player or you're part of a club, would you prefer to be like old Melburnians have been for the last, how long have they
Mm.
been in A grade? Since 2015, I think you said.
Yep, 2015.
I don't think they made the finals that whole time, or maybe once or twice.
Maybe
They
once
cert
or twice. They
they
certainly weren't,
certainly
yeah, they weren't
not premiership
perennial.
challenges,
No,
not really
not
premiership challenges.
not in my
They
time. No,
and they didn't win one. All right, they didn't win a
no,
premiership.
correct. They didn't.
But Fitzroy, and I mean, I guess you could put the Blacks in the similar category, being in A grade quite often and not won a flag since 2014.
Yep,
They were very unlucky not to win one against Old Haileybury in 2022. Was it 22? Yeah.
I believe so. Yes.
Um, but or you could be in the case of Fitzroy, who've dropped all the way down to C grade, won a premiership, come up to B grade, won a premiership, gone to A grade, come back down, and they're really odds on probably to win a premiership this year.
Mm,
So yeah, it's just interesting to me to think about the dynamics and would you rather be somebody that's floated between grades, but you might have won three premierships,
mm.
or you can say on your footballing resume or whatever that you were a more permanent A grade player.
It is an interesting question. I tend to feel like a lot of players in VAFA don't, at least from what I can see, don't tend to make a whole lot of decisions based on the grade a team is playing. Um, uh, we've had some ex-AFL players, rolling around in Div 1 and playing there, and you look at some of the other divisions. I know a few players in like Div 2, like really good footballers, like footballers that could probably be playing Prem A, Prem C, Prem B, but I don't think they make the decision of I need that on my resume of I'm a Prem A player. I think you look at like talent is talent, and I think the talented players will get picked up by the VFL, AFL, even if they're playing, Div
Yeah.
One. So I don't see it. I mean, maybe some others might disagree with that, but at least from my perspective, I don't. I don't see there being a really big push of we need to be playing, um, you know, Premier A to get anywhere. So it is an interesting question to ask though.
Yeah, I did see in the ins and outs, there's a guy called Luke Kennedy who's been picked up by the Doggies, who
Yes,
played for Ormond.
yes,
I think Ormond are D1.
yes, I believe they are.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So that's B grade. We're gonna have a little look at C grade. Um, and I must say, as we are with the Uni Blacks and have been fortunate enough to be in A and B for a little while now, my knowledge of some of the clubs in C grade is a little less, but we're still going to have a look and see what's happening in C grade. So as with Prem A and Prem B, 10 teams in the division, and and relegation and promotion just the same. So let's see if I can find the ladder from Prem C in 2024. So Old Carey were on top, and as you alluded to in your Prem B analysis, Pete, Old Carey had a fantastic year in 2024. Um, Finished with a percentage of 208. Um, Hampton Rovers actually finished on the same number of wins, 16 wins for both Rovers and the Panthers. Ajax came in third, Parkdale Vultures fourth, Mazenod, Glen Ira, Penley and Essendon Grammar or Pegs, Marcelin Old Collegians, Monash Blues came in ninth, relegated to D1. Oakley came in 10th, also relegated to D1. Monash Blues, we remember playing them in B grade as the Blacks. Yep, not nice to see one of the university alumni teams dropping all the way back down, having been in B grade.
Mm,
But yeah, it's been a tough few years
it
for the
has.
other Blues in the VAFA.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so Carey and Hampton have gone up, and then coming in from Division One was Parkside and Paran. From what I can tell, Parkside were the strongest side most of the year in Division One, but they got pipped by Paran in the grand final. Very low scoring grand final, something like 34 to 18 or something. Very low scoring. Pretty wet and muddy on that day, if I remember rightly.
It was. I remember I was watching the live stream for that one.
Yeah.
It was an awful day for football.
There
That's the only
was a
way
few,
you can put it.
yeah, there were quite a few grand finals, I would say, that were marred by the inclement weather. Um, Actually, it was mostly the state of the ground. A lot of the grounds were awful, but I guess that's Melbourne. Um, so Parkside, Pete, they're into C grade.
Hmm.
I don't have the exact numbers for how long it's been since they've been in the top three Premier
Not
grades.
sure.
It's been quite some time. I did actually see that they won the A grade flag in 1989. So
Wow.
they have been in A grade, and they've gone all the way to the top, and they've fallen all the way down
Mm.
um, to Div 4. Now, this
Wow.
is, yeah, so they've actually had three promotions in a row. Yeah, they're chasing their fourth straight promotion. If they were to make the grand final in C grade and get to Premier B, um, that'd be pretty extraordinary.
That would
Uh,
be, clearly I don't know whether we've mentioned it before, but clearly the VAFA standard for that is the old St. Bede's, with Luke Beveridge going from Prem C winning the premiership to Prem B winning the premiership to Prem A winning the premiership 3 years in a row. But four promotions in a row, it might not be necessarily, coming from Prem C all the way up to Prem A, but four promotions in a row would be an incredible feat. So we'll have to keep our eye on that one.
Absolutely. Yep. Keep our eye on the Devils, Parkside Devils. It's prescient that you mention St. Bede's Mentone Tigers. They were one of the teams relegated from Prem B along with Bow Morris. Both St. Bede's and Bow Morris are clubs that we know quite well from many seasons in both A grade and B grade over the years. St. Bede's, it's I think quite some time since they've dropped down to C grade. I need to consult my psychedelic spreadsheet to know whether this, but I suspect this might be the first time St. Bede's have been in C grade since that premiership, since the pivotal first premiership
Yeah, wow.
under Luke Beveridge that started that climb up the mountain that you talked about.
Mm,
And Bow Morris have definitely been perennial, mostly B grade, but some stints in A grade as well.
yep.
And extremely proud clubs that will be pretty disappointed, I would suggest, at finding themselves down in C grade. So the teams that will be rolling out in the third division of the VAFA will be Ajax, Parkdale Vultures, Mazenod, Glen Ira McKinnon, Pegs, Marcellin Old Collegians, Parkside Devils, Paran, Beaumaris, and St. Bede's. So, pretty interesting grade here. We're really talking about clubs that have pushed up from the lower divisions.
Mm,
And, in terms of what I was mentioning, with nothing to lose, for clubs coming up into B grade, even more so here. I mean, if you're at Parkside and Paran, what a time to be alive. Just go out there and have a crack. See if you can knock off some of these clubs like Beaumaris and St Bede's that have not so long ago been in A grade. That's the beauty of this kind of level of football. And then there are clubs like Mazenod, Pegs, Marcelin, and Ajax who have spent quite a bit of time in
mm.
Prem C. Um, and so, in the evolution of those clubs, they'll be hoping to take the next step. Ajax certainly is one amongst them that have spent a bit of time in B, perhaps more than some of the others in the last decade or so. So, in terms of what I think is going to happen, looking at what was happening last season, um, there was a really big drop off on the ladder um, from the top four sides to the rest. So one of those sides that was in the top four, and certainly on paper, the best in the home and away season was Ajax, quite comfortably. So Ajax had 15 wins and a percentage of 182 to come in third. That's a pretty strong season. Um, And I suggest that Ajax and Parkdale, who were the team that came in fourth, would be pretty strong contenders um, to ascend back to Premier B. Parkdale actually are another club that has spent a bit of time in Prem B of recent times. So um, Parkdale were actually the ones that made the preliminary final over Ajax. You might have picked Ajax to beat that club based on their form, but it was Parkdale that hit their straps in the finals. They lost to Hampton, who were then promoted.
And I believe
Um,
I believe they only lost to Hampton in the prelim final by about a goal,
yeah, it was very
Parkdale.
close. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. Um, so I'm pretty bullish about Parkdale and Ajax.
yep.
I would suggest. Parkdale had the leading goal kicker in C grade last year. That was Mitch Brown, ex-AFL player, kicked 87 goals. I haven't seen him on the outs list, so I'm going to assume he's going round again. And you have to think if you've got a key forward in Prem C that can kick you 80 plus goals a season, that's going to go a long way
It's
towards
huge.
helping them. So my final prediction is Ajax and Parkdale. I think they're the two clubs that will be promoted to
Wow.
Prem B. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Now one might assume that I would have predicted one of the St Bede's or Beaumaris to go back up. Not so. Um, I'm not seeing it, but
Wow.
I do think of those two, St Bede's is stronger placed. The word and the recruiting drive seems to be that St Bede's Mentone have done it a little bit better over the pre-season. The word on the Bo Morris recruiting is that they haven't made any big recruits and they're going with the young side. And so it sounds a little bit to me like what you were describing with OMs when you were saying you were concerned about OMs dropping with a young side and I don't know, maybe taking it a little lightly or being a bit surprised by the grade or trying some new things out. I don't think Beaumaris are going to get relegated, but I don't see them challenging for the finals. I think they might have to spend another year in C to work their
Mm.
way back up. And I'm going to go for an absolute outsider smoky, Pete. I'm going to say Parkside are going to make the finals. Now,
Wow.
I don't think they're going to get promoted. I don't think they're going to get their fourth straight promotion. But like I was saying about the fact that there was such a big drop between the top four in Prem C last year and the rest, I reckon that really leaves it open for an up and coming side with momentum. Um, they've got to believe in themselves, right? This has been an extraordinary 3 years that they've had. Feeling around that club's got to be really good. We know the history's there. We know within that organisation it's capable of challenging the higher grades. Like I said, I don't think they'll get promoted, but I do think they might give a few sides a scare in Prem C this year. So watch out for the Devils. Um, what do we got here? Relegation prediction. Look, I know very little about some of these clubs, I'll be honest. I don't know a whole lot about Mazenod, about Penley and Essendon Grammar. both of those sides seem to be there and thereabouts. Um, Based on the percentages and the outcomes towards the end of last season, I would say that Glen Ira, McKinnon, and Marcelin look like the weaker of the sides left in Prem C this year. They both had the lowest percentages of the sides to survive relegation, and um, I think in Prem C, you need attacking power. Like I was saying with Mitch Brown at Parkdale, you've got strong forwards, strong attacking power. I think that's what will be needed to survive. So my prediction would be that Glen Ira, McKinnon, and Marcelin go down. Um, yeah, and I think Parkdale might win the premiership over Ajax in that division, but it's either Ajax or Parkdale and Parkside to cause a few scares. But gee, that's a southeast heavy league.
It is.
Southeast heavy division. I mean, Ajax is down in Albert Park, and then you've got Parkdale, Parkside, Beaumaris, St. Bede's. Um, I
Yeah.
guess Essendon's over in the west. That's kind of holding the fort for
Well,
the rest of Melbourne. I don't even know where Glen Ira is, but
I believe it's in Glen Ira.
I think it might be close to McKinnon.
Well, that's
Anyhow,
that's comprehensive, Rob. I'm glad this could be one of the few. I mean, we've had a few that we've agreed on, but I think Parkdale as well. Parkdale always really impressed me when we played against them from a Blacks perspective. Even in the year where they were clearly struggling, they just seemed like a club that just had their stuff together. And it's been good to see that. I know that they took a requested relegation during that COVID period when they were struggling. And it's just been great to see that that's paid off. Like, that they went back, they knew they needed to go back, develop. They had a really young team. It's just been nice to see that pay off for them. I think that's really encouraging. So I'm really bullish on them as well. I'm maybe not as bullish on Ajax. I don't know whether that's just because every time the Blacks played Ajax, it just always felt like we'd banked 4 points. Albeit I do remember one time we played Ajax and I thought, oh God, we just snuck over the line. But outside of that, I always felt comfortable against them. But it is hard to ignore the fact that they had a really impressive season last year. They finished one game or one win behind both the teams that got promoted in Old Carey and Hampton. So certainly can see that. I agree. I think St. Bede's will certainly challenge. I think they'll be up there. And I'm keen to see how the promoted teams in Parkside and Prahran do go. I got a little soft spot for Marcelin just because of Jared Carlson with him
mm,
coming to the Blacks. So it'd be nice to see them survive just for JC. But
my dad
I
went to Marcelin too. That's another
well, there you
another
go.
reason, but he never
There's
played
another
for
reason.
them. But
Um, but yeah, I do look at that and think Marcelin might be in a bit of trouble. Looking at the grade and what's coming up, but very comprehensive. And the final one that we will look at, and we won't necessarily do a comprehensive one of Division One. More so, we might have a look at who's going to come join us in the Premier divisions. And it's really exciting. I always find you mentioned that, yeah, and I agree that Prem B to who's getting into Prem A, I find really exciting. I equally find that Division One who's coming to Premier really exciting. So look, going back the other way, as we just mentioned in C, Monash are back there having done the double drop. Um, yeah, it's hard to have confidence in them. It is
yeah,
hard when you've double dropped. It's hard to have confidence in saying someone's going to come back up from Div One into Prem C. I'm looking more to the likes of UHSVU, Ormond, and Old Peninsula, who all had really good seasons last year in Div One. Couldn't quite get across the line when it came to Parkside and Paran. But I'm looking to them to sort of be that next frontier to try and join Prem C. So in saying that, there was sort of really quite a close ladder. Paran were a couple of games ahead, but then looking at Parkside, Parkside were only a game ahead of both Ormond and UHSVU, and then both of those teams were a couple of games ahead of Old Peninsula. So that's sort of where I'm looking towards those teams. You do have the likes of Derry Penola and Preston Bull Ants and Q and but they sort of weren't necessarily completely away from the pack, but probably not at the level I think they need to be at if they do want to challenge for that. And sort of in saying that, the prelim final again quite close. UHS VU missing out by 7 points to Parkside to get to Prem C last year. So I think for me, they're certainly my first prediction. I reckon they right the wrongs of that 7 point prelim loss. Had a really strong ladder position last year. From all reports, sound like they've recruited well. And I reckon they bump into Prem C in 2026. And I'm going Ormond as well to join them in 2026. For me, it was a toss up between Ormond and Old Peninsula as to who I thought could get into it. Um, when I looked at it, and this is always just a worry for me. I don't know what your take is on this, but Old Peninsula's reserves finished dead bottom on 1 win. And I always just get worried about a team's ability to push for a promotion when there's potentially not that depth there.
Mm.
Clearly, their ones team strong enough to make finals and be within that sort of upper echelon. But I always just worry about, it's a couple of key injuries here or there, and that potentially puts you at no chance for making the final. So that was literally all I went with on my prediction to go Ormond into that. So um, but
Yeah,
that's
can't argue with
where
that.
that's sort of where that's where I'm going. Um, and yeah, so the boldness of my prediction is that I don't believe there's going to be an immediate return for Monash or Oakley to Prem C. They've both been relegated from Prem B down. They both got relegated with pretty poor seasons. It took Oakley 6 seasons last time to win their way back to C when they were relegated back to Div 1. So based off that, I'm and the season they had last year, I'm going that Oakley won't jump straight back up into C, and I don't think Monash will jump straight back into C either. I'd really like to see Monash. I've always really liked Monash. I'd really like to see them have just a strong season in Div 1, finish mid-table, build on that, and go for something in 2026. Yeah, I would hate to be looking at ladders midway through the year in Div 1 and seeing Monash struggling again and potentially doing the triple drop. So yeah, UHSU, VU, and Ormond for me, joining the ranks of the premiers in Prem C. That's what I've got on the books for Division 1. But I do think similar to your prediction around B is it looks like a pretty good grade. Like I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those other teams in it, like your Qs and your Preston Bull Ants, who had good seasons, 7 and 8 wins respectively for Preston and Q. So by no means do you come away from that season going it was a complete travesty. I look at that and go, yeah, I wouldn't be as surprised to see them do well as well. So um, yeah, it does look like it's going to be quite an even grade in my opinion.
Yeah, nice. Good summary. Yeah, it's you really get spread out geographically, don't you? When you get
Yeah, yeah,
down to those grades.
you do.
Um, yeah, I was just having a look at all of the different different parts of Melbourne represented. I mean, if you finally start to see the northern suburbs represented, like Preston and West Brunswick and teams like that. So that's good to see. I don't have too much more to add, Pete. I think that's a good summary. I think I can't argue with your sentiments on Monash Blues. I agree. I'd like to see them do well. Um, you get the sense that it, they've been in terminal decline for some time and have been hanging on, and then dropping.
Mm.
Uh, doesn't doesn't fill one with confidence that
No,
that once they've dropped this level that they will rebound quickly. But yeah, you'd have to think it gets pretty challenging. I guess there's I guess there's hot competition for players in every part of the world, but every part of the every part of Melbourne for sure. Not so much hot competition for AFL players here in Boulder, Colorado, but um, uh, out there in the outer east. I mean, you're getting pretty much into the outer east, and
yeah,
the Eastern Footy League is incredibly strong.
it is.
And I get the sense that Monash as a campus compared to being able to attract players to the University of Melbourne clubs, which is central and you can almost live anywhere in Melbourne and still play for the Uni Blues or the Uni Blacks. But um, you know, living out there and not perhaps having the same campus dynamic as Melbourne. Um, you look at the other clubs from universities in Melbourne, Latrobe and Swinburne, also in the VAFA, and they neither of those have been able to rise out of the division grades for some time. So, if ever, I don't actually know. But certainly not in our time have Latrobe or Swinburne been up in Prem C. So yeah, it doesn't bode that well for Monash. But then on the other hand, unlike Latrobe and Swinburne, Monash do have a history in those higher grades, and
Yes,
um, fingers crossed for them. As you say, perhaps the best thing is a rebuild, um, and
hopefully. Yeah,
a reasonably, perhaps a finals performance to give them some confidence that they're there or thereabouts, and then build on that. Um, yeah, all right. We've got around the grades. We've gone from A grade down to Div 1. We'd love to hear if you're a VAFA tragic, your predictions. We want to know where you think we've gone wrong. I'm sure we'll find out pretty quickly as the season gets underway. Um, but Pete, we might have a look at some of the other leagues around Victoria in the coming weeks. We've got 2 or 3, we've got 3 weeks, I think, at least until the start of most local footy seasons. Um, we might also slip some fun ones in there too. We want to maybe get some votes on, I don't know, your favourite club mascot or your favourite club jumpers. It's not Ivanhoe for me. Um,
and it's not the old Melburnians Bumblebee for me.
it's not old Melburnians at all because the home jumper's just plain blue. I mean, you got to do more with it than that. And definitely not the Bumblebee. Um, Yeah, we'll come up with some fun things, I reckon, to have a look at in local footy. Maybe your favourite club name. There's some absolute crackers around Victoria. They could even come from outside Victoria. It's been a lot of fun. We've taken a tour through the VAFA grades. We're very excited to see what happens, who ends up where. Particularly excited to see the Blacks make the finals, and we
Other
hope that
blacks.
yeah, we hope your pre-season's going well, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Catch you later. Cool.
Perfect.
Nice work. I still think we managed to talk for more than an hour. I don't know, maybe about an hour.
Yeah,
I don't
about
know.
an hour.
Yeah. No, maybe
I
not
reckon,
quite.
I reckon it's about an hour.